Welcome to the second of two sociology screencasts looking at essay writing. In the previous screencast, we looked at how you would structure a question that asks you to evaluate a claim. And in this video, we're going to look at two other types of longer essay questions that come up on sociology exam papers. We're going to look at how you might structure a question that requires you to evaluate a specific theory, and then we're also going to look at questions that ask you to evaluate a range of sociological explanations. So if you get a question that asks you to evaluate a particular theoretical perspective, then I suggest using this five-part essay structure consisting of an introduction, a concise summary of the main characteristics of the theory, examples of studies and writers who we would associate with the perspective, an evaluation of the theory, and then a conclusion. And it's really important to maximise your chance of getting a high grade that section number 4, where you evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the theory, that section needs to be the longest. So in the previous screencast I explained the elements of an effective introduction, and I also showed you this template that might help you to write effective introductions. So here we have an example of a world sociology question asking you to evaluate a theory. In this case you've got to evaluate modernisation theory, and what we can see here, if you hit the pause button, is an introduction using the template that I showed you on the previous slide. So if you hit the pause button in a moment, you'll see that this introductory paragraph is based on the template that I showed you on the previous slide. Once you've written your introduction, you then need a concise summary of the main characteristics of the theory that the question is asking you to evaluate. So as I've just said, you need to begin the main body of your essay by identifying the main characteristics of the particular perspective that you're going to examine. You need to make sure that you summarise the main assumptions that this theory makes about the particular topic, be that power, development, inequality, the media, depending on the unit that's being examined. And when you are looking at the characteristics of this perspective, you need to think about the main concerns of this particular approach and the main questions that this particular theory asks. In other words, what we're looking for is a concise summary of the main claims that the theory would make about the subject of the essay. So what you can see on the screen at the moment, going back to the essay about modernisation theory and development, is a concise summary of the key claims that this perspective makes about development. When you've summarised the main characteristics of the theory, we then move on to this third section, examples of studies. So in this section of your answer, you're going to display your knowledge of the perspective in more detail by explaining the main writers or studies which illustrate this particular theory. So in other words, you've got to have a look at the major writers who've contributed to this particular approach. You've got to look at their main arguments and claims that they make, and you've got to consider the evidence that they use in support of their claims. So going back to the essay on modernisation theory, the key thinker that we would associate with that particular perspective on development is Walt Rostow, and what you can see on the screen at the moment is a paragraph summarising the work of this important modernisation theorist. Now, one of the most common mistakes that students make with this type of essay structure is they spend a lot of their time describing the main characteristics of the theory and describing key writers and studies, and then they don't spend enough time evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. And that is a big mistake, because the bulk of the marks for longer essay questions are tied to this skill of evaluation. So you need to build in plenty of time to really consider and weigh up the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. This section number 4 needs to be the longest part of your essay. So in order to evaluate the contribution that the theory has made to the topic in the question, you need to consider its strengths and its weaknesses. So you need, firstly, to have a think about the positive contribution that this theory has made to our understanding. For example, what new questions has it raised? What issues has it attempted to resolve? What sociological debates has it developed? But you also need to be critical. You also need to point out the main criticisms that have been made at this particular theory. And the key to good evaluation, I think, is your ability to formulate critical questions about sociological arguments and theories. So it's useful to try to formulate a list of questions or a list of criteria that might help you to evaluate sociological theories and arguments. For example, if you hit the pause button and have a look at the grid that you can see on the screen at the moment, you've got here an example of a series of questions and criteria that you could use to help you formulate critical questions about particular theories. So try to practice interrogating theories and sociological arguments using these types of questions as much as possible. It will really help you to develop your skill of evaluation. And as I mentioned in the previous screencast, it's important to signpost to the examiner the skill of evaluation by using these types of words and phrases that really give your answer a kind of critical style and edge. The final part of this 5-part essay structure for questions that are requiring you to evaluate a theory is the conclusion. And in the previous screencast, I showed you this template which I think can help you to write effective conclusions. And what you can see on the screen at the moment are examples of real questions that require you to evaluate a specific theory. So we've got here examples from the sociology of the media, from political sociology, and from world sociology. Okay, I'm going to finish this screencast by looking at the third type of longer essay question that comes up on sociology exam papers, and these are questions that ask you to evaluate not one theory, but to evaluate sociological explanations in the plural. So these types of questions are asking you to assess or evaluate a range of sociological explanations of a particular issue. So you've got to evaluate a range of sociological theories. So as usual, you need to write an introduction where you decode the question and you signpost the shape of your argument, and then you need to look at a range of sociological explanations in the main body of your essay. So in other words, in the main body of your essay, you need to identify all of the main sociological theories or explanations to a particular issue. So this is likely to be a comparative exercise looking at different competing perspectives, and in each case you need to make sure that you identify the main arguments that are set out by a theory and the evidence which appears to support it. But also, because this is an evaluation essay, it's really important to also note down the arguments and evidence against that particular contribution. So on this screen at the moment we've got an example of this type of essay question from the World Sociology unit. So evaluate the usefulness of sociological explanations of inequality in the developing world. Here's the introductory paragraph, and here's a section of the main body of the essay dealing with the neoliberal perspective. You can see that there's a description here of the neoliberal position, that it's explicitly compared with modernisation theory, but also we can see that in addition to just describing this particular approach to inequality, there is criticism, and this is really important to make sure that you score highly for evaluation. And here are some examples of the types of exam questions that are based on this particular format. So with all of these questions, you've got to identify a range of sociological theories or explanations of either voting behaviour or power or inequality, but then you've also got to weigh up the strengths and weaknesses of these perspectives. Now, just to finish this screencast on essay writing, I want you in a moment to hit the pause button and study this grid that you can see on the screen at the moment. This is important because I think in all subjects it's really important to be very clear about the success criteria, to have a good idea of how your work is going to be assessed. And this is what our exam board uses to train up examiners to make sure that the marking is reliable. So this gives you a good insight into the types of things that examiners are going to be looking for when they're marking your essay. And this banding system, basically to get an A or a B, you need to provide good evidence of most of these things. A C or a D answer would have some evidence of these criteria, and a grade E answer would have only basic evidence. And of course, if your answer really doesn't provide very much evidence of any of these criteria, then you're going to get an ungraded. And in light of this, I think we can identify 6 golden rules for writing an effective sociology essay. So number 1 is to answer the question that is being asked. So make sure that you stick to the question. Number 2 is to make sure that you write your answer in your own words. Number 3 is to make sure that you deploy theory and evidence in an appropriate way. Number 4 is to make sure that you show off the skill of evaluation by asking critical questions of the evidence and theories that you present. Number 5 is to always think about the structure of your essay and to do a plan, making sure that you demonstrate good writing skills. And number 6 is to keep an eye on the clock to make sure that you stay on top of your time management.